The first modern Olympic Games opened in Athens in 1896, a global celebration of excellence, friendship, and respect. These games were modest, just a single major venue, no Olympic village, no international broadcasts, and very little energy use. Everything relied on existing infrastructure. Fast forward 130 years, and now the Olympics have become one of the largest construction and tourism projects on the planet. Host cities now build stadiums, hotels, transportation networks, and entire communities within a few short years. Millions of visitors fly in, and the energy demands rival that of small nations. With every games expected to outdo the last, the scale has grown from a handful of venues to an average of more than 35. This raises an important question. For an event so globally massive, how sustainable can it really be? The International Olympic Committee has introduced sustainability guidelines, but the Games still generate enormous waste and CO2 emissions, long before the opening ceremonies. This gap between the IOC policy and real world practice is what I'll be examining today. I'll look at how construction, infrastructure, and energy use interact with larger ecological systems like the carbon cycle, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. And finally, I'll explore solutions that could make future games more sustainable. Once a city is selected, planning and construction begin immediately. According to research, construction and construction materials contribute to the largest share of CO2 emissions leading up to the Games. Concrete, steel, and large scale ecological alterations release, on average, an equivalent amount of CO2 as a city of 1 million people does annually. Renovating existing venues helps, but the pressure to modernize still adds to the footprint. Attendance has also grown to more than 8 million spectators. Most travel by air, creating a massive spike in emissions. Host cities often expand transportation systems to handle the influx, which means clearing more vegetation, fragmenting habitats, altering soil structure, and increasing polluted runoff into waterways. New roads also trigger induced demand. More infrastructure encourages more travel, and with more pavement comes stronger heat island effects, which increases the energy use and stresses local systems more. Housing up to 15,000 athletes, staff, and media personnel requires an enormous amount of energy. Lighting, security, heating and cooling, and 24-hour broadcasts, that all strains the local power grids. Temporary generators often fill the gap, and even with renewable energy, consumption far exceeds normal city levels. This temporary surge contributes significantly to the game's ecological footprint. One of the most overlooked impacts is what happens after the games. Many venues become virtually abandoned after the games. These stadiums are referred to as white elephants, which are basically expensive structures with little long-term use. Beijing National Stadium, which is commonly known as the Bird's Nest, from the 2008 Beijing Olympics, is a perfect example. It's mostly an unused structure that does really nothing more than absorb resources. These abandoned venues, they sit on land that once served as forests, wetlands, or grasslands, which are all natural carbon sinks that are now permanently lost. Soil fertility declines, drainage patterns change, and wildlife movement is disrupted. The ecological consequences can last for decades. When we combine construction, transportation expansion, energy use, and long-term infrastructure, we see a reinforcing cycle of ecological harm. Construction is the primary driver of this loop, which leads to vegetation clearing and increased CO2 output. This loop then extends back to fuel more construction and consumption of energy, as shown in the graphic. This negative feedback loop magnifies strain on ecosystems, reducing biodiversity and weakening ecosystem services like the carbon cycle and water filtration. Recognizing these impacts is the first step towards meaningful change. Research shows that reducing the Olympic carbon footprint requires system-level thinking from start to finish. A study from the University of Lausanne in Switzerland from 2025 notes that host cities are beginning to adopt something called policy mobility, which is basically borrowing successful sustainability strategies from previous games and improving on them. One of the most effective approaches is prioritizing existing venues rather than building new ones. When new construction is unavoidable, there is design for long-term use, which helps prevent future white elephants. The IOC's 2017 sustainability strategy recommends a few more things: investing in low-emission transportation, expanding on public transit and walkability, using renewable energy sources like solar and wind, and restoring damaged ecosystems through replanting, wetland rehabilitation, and soil restoration after the Games. These steps show a sustainable Olympics is possible if long term ecological health becomes a priority. While the Olympics only last a few weeks, their environmental impact can span decades. Construction, transportation, energy use, and abandoned infrastructure all interact in reinforcing ways that strain ecosystems and disrupt essential natural processes. But the same systems thinking approach that reveals these problems also point towards solutions. By reusing venues, planning for long term ecological restoration, and embracing renewable energy and sustainable transportation, host cities can transform the Games into a model of environmental responsibility. If we view the Olympics not only as a celebration of excellence, friendship, and respect, but also as an opportunity to showcase environmental stewardship, we can reshape the Games for a more sustainable future.